Every woman in this video had a reason to leave. Some had multiple reasons: court orders, police reports, hospital visits, handwritten letters warning exactly what was coming. The paperwork existed, the evidence existed, but the thing that kept them in place, the thing that overrode every instinct telling them to go, was their children. They made a calculation that staying gave their kids stability, kept the family together, kept custody intact, that the risk to themselves was worth what their children would have if they stayed. They were wrong. Not because their reasoning was foolish, because the men they were trying to protect their children from had already decided what was going to happen. 10 women. 10 different states, different decades, different circumstances. Some had reported the abuse. Some had documented everything. Some had no visible warning at all. What every single one of them had in common is that they made the choice to stay for their kids, and their husbands killed them for it. Case 1. Kathleen Savio. On the morning of March 1, 2004, a group of neighbours in Bolingbrook, Illinois, broke into a house on Pheasant Chase Drive after getting no answer at the door. They found 40-year-old Kathleen Savio face down in a dry bathtub. There was no water in the tub. Her hair was soaked in blood from a wound on the back of her head. A coroner's jury, which included a police officer who personally knew and vouched for her ex-husband, ruled her death an accidental drowning. The case was closed the same year it was opened. Kathleen had 2 sons, Thomas, who was 11, and Christopher, who was 9. She had divorced her husband, Drew Peterson, a Bolingbrook police sergeant, just months earlier. The divorce had been ugly. A court had not yet decided how to split their shared finances. Kathleen was set to receive a portion of Drew's police pension. She died before that ruling was ever made, and Drew Peterson inherited everything. For years before that morning, Kathleen had been telling anyone who would listen that Drew Peterson was going to kill her. She told her sisters, she told friends, she told the police. She wrote a letter to the state's attorney. Nobody did enough. The man she was warning people about was a 29-year veteran of the Bolingbrook Police Department. His colleagues answered the domestic disturbance calls at her house. His name carried weight in that town. Hers did not. What most people did not know until years later was that in the final months of her life, Kathleen was fighting to stay close to her sons while a court slowly worked through her divorce. She had been warned by people who knew Drew that leaving him would make things worse, not better. She had tried to get help from the same police department her husband worked for. She stayed in that orbit, the custody battles, the court hearings, the phone calls, because of Thomas and Christopher. It cost her everything. Kathleen grew up in difficult circumstances. Her parents divorced when she was 2 years old. Her stepfather was not a reliable provider, and money was scarce for most of her childhood. Her sisters later described her as someone who was determined to build a better life for herself. She wanted a career, a home, and children, in that order. She became an accountant. She worked hard to get herself stable before she let herself fall in love. She was close to 30 when she agreed to a blind date with a Bolingbrook police officer. Drew Peterson was charming, confident, and knew how to read people. He was also still married to his second wife, Vicky Connolly, when the blind date happened, something Kathleen did not immediately know. His second wife later said that during their marriage, Drew had told her he knew how to kill her and make it look like an accident. Drew's relationship with Kathleen began as an affair while he was still with Connolly. When Connolly found out, she ended the marriage. Drew and Kathleen married in May 1992, just months after his divorce from Connolly was finalised. In some ways, the early years of the marriage gave Kathleen what she had always wanted. They had 2 sons, they co-owned a bar called Suds Pub in Montgomery, Illinois, and Kathleen kept the books. They took vacations, including one trip to Hawaii, but the marriage was volatile from early on. In 1993, during one argument with Drew, Kathleen hit her head on the dining room table. Hospital records documented the injury. Her sisters said they saw bruises on her over the years, though Kathleen rarely talked about the abuse directly. Drew Peterson denied any physical violence took place throughout the marriage. In October 2001, an anonymous letter arrived in Kathleen's mailbox. It told her that her husband had been having an affair with a 17-year-old girl named Stacey Cales, who worked in the village. The letter said that officials at the police department were aware of the situation and considered it a joke within the department. Kathleen confronted Drew. According to her sister Susan Doman, it turned physical. Hospital records from that period align with what her family described. Kathleen filed for divorce shortly after. By the spring of 2002, Drew had moved out of the family home and bought a house down the street, where he moved in with Stacey Cales. He and Kathleen were not yet legally divorced. They were less than a mile apart. Their sons went back and forth between the two houses, and the abuse, which had been happening behind closed doors for years, began generating a paper trail. Between 2002 and 2004, police were called to the Peterson household on Pheasant Chase Drive 18 times for domestic disturbances. Those calls included allegations of physical abuse, threats, and disputes over the children being returned late after visits. Kathleen accused Drew of beating her and threatening to kill her. Drew, using his knowledge of the department and the system he worked in, persuaded prosecutors to charge Kathleen herself with domestic battery. She was acquitted both times. Not a single charge was ever brought against Drew Peterson from any of those 18 calls. In March 2002, Kathleen filed an emergency order of protection against Drew, writing in the filing that he had threatened her on the phone and physically chased her. She wrote that Drew wanted her dead and that if he had to, he would burn the house down to shut her up. That order of protection was later dropped. In July 2002, Kathleen alleged that Drew came to her home, pushed her down the stairs, and told her to turn her head so he could kill her. She reported it to police. Nothing happened. That November, Kathleen wrote directly to the Will County Assistant State's Attorney. She described the ongoing abuse and wrote, "He knows how to manipulate the system, and his next step is to take my children away, or kill me instead. I haven't received help from the police here in Bolingbrook, and am asking for your help now, before it's too late. Please return my call, or write with answers to my questions." There is no record of a response that changed anything. She had also told her sister Susan, "He's going to kill me, and it's going to look like an accident." On February 27, 2004, Drew picked up Thomas and Christopher from Kathleen's house for a scheduled visit. The boys spent 2 days with their father. Prosecutors later argued that during the early hours of February 29th, Drew returned to Kathleen's home while the boys were with him. What happened inside that house is something only one person knows with certainty, and that person spent years lying about it. On March 1, 2004, neighbours who had not been able to reach Kathleen broke into the house. They found her in the bathtub. The tub was dry and clean. Her hair was wet with blood. There was a 1-inch gash on the back of her head. The bruising on the front of her body, across her hips, thighs, shins and hands, was fresh, less than an hour old when she died, according to forensic evidence examined years later. Forensic pathologist Dr. Larry Blum later testified that the abrasions on her back could not have been caused by contact with the smooth surface of a bathtub, and that adults do not drown in empty bathtubs unless they are intoxicated or physically incapacitated. Kathleen had no alcohol or drugs in her system. Despite all of that, the original coroner's jury, which included at least one officer who knew Drew personally and reportedly assured other jurors that Drew was a good man who would never hurt his wife, ruled the death an accidental drowning. Drew Peterson, who said he was home with Stacey Cales at the time of Kathleen's death, was not charged. Kathleen's sisters did not believe the ruling. Neither did several investigators who looked at the evidence, but Drew was a cop, the ruling stood, and the case was closed. Drew Peterson married Stacey Cales on October 18, 2003, while Kathleen was still alive. He was 49 years old, she was 19. Stacey moved into the house down the street from the woman her husband would later kill. Kathleen's sons, Thomas and Christopher, went back and forth between the two homes until their mother was found dead. Then, on October 28, 2007, Stacey Peterson disappeared. She was 23 years old and had 2 young children of her own with Drew. She had been telling people she wanted a divorce and was afraid of what Drew would do if she left. Her pastor, Reverend Neil Shorey, later testified that Stacy had told him Drew killed Kathleen and had taught Stacy to lie to police and provide his alibi for the night Kathleen died. Stacy told Shorey she had woken up in the middle of the night and found Drew missing from bed. When he returned in the early morning hours, she saw him put his clothes and the contents of a bag into the washing machine. Stacy has never been found. Her disappearance reopened everything. Investigators exhumed Kathleen's body on November 13, 2007. Dr. Blum performed a second autopsy that same afternoon. His conclusion was clear. Kathleen Savio died by drowning, and the manner of death was homicide. She had been drowned and then placed in the bathtub. Will County State's Attorney James Glasgow announced the homicide ruling on February 21, 2008. On May 7, 2009, Drew Peterson was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Bail was set at $20 million. The trial that followed was unlike almost anything that had come before it in Illinois history, because both Kathleen and Stacy, the two people who could speak most directly to what Drew Peterson had done, were unavailable to testify. Prosecutors built their case largely on what those women had told others while they were still alive. Illinois passed a new piece of legislation specifically to allow those statements into evidence. It became known informally as Drew's Law. Under that law, the jury heard what Kathleen had written to the state's attorney. They heard what Stacy had told her pastor. They heard what Kathleen had told her sister, that Drew was going to kill her and make it look like an accident. On September 6, 2012, the jury found Drew Peterson guilty of first-degree murder in the killing of Kathleen Savio. Kathleen's mother, Marcia Savio, told reporters, "Finally, somebody heard Kathleen's cry. 12 people did the right thing." Kathleen's brother Nick called the verdict bittersweet. He said the family hoped Kathleen could now rest in peace, knowing she had had her day. On February 21, 2013, Drew Peterson was sentenced to 38 years in prison. While serving that sentence at Menard Correctional Center, he attempted to arrange for the murder of Will County State's Attorney James Glasgow, the prosecutor who had convicted him. He was convicted of that as well and sentenced to an additional 40 years, to be served after his murder sentence ends. Kathleen's sons, Thomas and Christopher, were 11 and 9 when their mother died in that dry bathtub. They grew up without her. Thomas Peterson later publicly said that he came to believe his father killed both Kathleen and Stacy. Drew Peterson is currently serving his combined sentences at an undisclosed prison facility. He has never been charged in Stacy's disappearance. He has never said where she is. Kathleen Savio was 40 years old. She had been trying to get someone to listen for 2 years. Every letter she wrote, every police call she made, every order of protection she filed, all of it added up to a paper trail that documented exactly what was going to happen to her. It happened anyway. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next wife in this video also went to the police. She created a detailed log of every threat she received, handed it to detectives, and sat in a police interview room explaining exactly why she was afraid. Her husband was listening from a house less than a mile away, because he was the one sending the threats. Case 2. Crystal Krug. Crystal Krug was born on November 24, 1980, in Boulder, Colorado. She grew up with her parents, Lars and Linda Grimsrud, and her brother Lars Jr., in a household that supported everything she was curious about. From an early age, she was pulled in 2 directions, towards science and toward dance, and she followed both without compromise. She performed modern dance on stages as a child and kept dancing as an adult. She also graduated as valedictorian of her high school class in 1999 and earned an academic scholarship to the Colorado School of Mines to study chemical engineering. She later transferred to the University of Colorado Boulder and graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree in biochemical engineering. She had been working at Agilent Technologies for 19 years at the time of her death, building a career in project management that her employer later described as invaluable. She met her husband, Daniel Krug, through online dating while they were both in college. Daniel was 1 month older than Crystal, the youngest of 5 siblings and an Eagle Scout. He had attended high school in Lakewood and then the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., where he studied before moving back to Colorado. Crystal's parents liked him well enough, though her father Lars later described him as a cross between a car salesman and a politician. Crystal was drawn to his intelligence and to how inseparable he made their relationship feel. They married on July 7, 2007, at Holy Ghost Catholic Church in downtown Denver. They settled in Broomfield, Colorado, in a house on Promontory Loop in the Anthem neighborhood. They had 3 children, 2 daughters and a son. At the time of Crystal's death, the girls were 14 and 11 years old. The boy was 8. Daniel worked at the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. Crystal worked full-time at Agilent and was the primary earner in the household. She was also, by all accounts, the center of her children's lives, the one who drove them to school, organized their activities, supported her daughter's love of performing arts, and encouraged her son's interest in technology. She and her father Lars had spent decades working together on classic muscle cars in his garage, and even as an adult, she would go there just to sit and talk. It was the kind of relationship where nothing needed to be said for them to be comfortable. By 2023, the marriage was in serious trouble. Crystal's mother Linda later told investigators that her daughter no longer wanted to be in the marriage and was thinking about divorce and pursuing full custody of the children. The couple had stopped sharing a bedroom. Crystal had begun quietly preparing to leave. Daniel, by the account prosecutors later laid out at trial, was not willing to accept that. In October 2023, Crystal received a text message from an unknown number. The sender claimed to be Anthony Holland, a boy she had dated briefly when she was a teenager at Colorado School of Mines. That relationship had ended around the year 2000, more than 2 decades earlier, with both of them upset but no ongoing animosity. Holland had reached out a few times over the years, but nothing alarming. This message was different. When Crystal did not respond quickly, the same number sent a follow-up calling her a name and telling her to kill herself. On October 31, 2023, she received an email from an account linked to Holland's name that contained a photograph of Daniel outside his workplace. The message threatened Daniel. Crystal filed a police report that same day. Over the following weeks, the messages kept coming. One said the sender had seen her at a dentist's appointment and included a photo of her car. Another mocked her license plate tags for being expired. Others made clear the sender was watching her movements, knew her schedule, and believed she belonged with him instead of Daniel. One message read, "Give me the signal and he won't come home." The tone was escalating. Crystal created a detailed log of every message, every date, every threatening line, and brought it to Broomfield Police Sergeant Andrew Martinez in November 2023. Police body camera footage from that meeting later played at trial showed Crystal telling the officer, "This is exhausting. It has definitely made me paranoid everywhere I go." She was so frightened that she began carrying a firearm. In November 2023, she sat in her father's garage, the same garage where they had worked on cars together since she was a child, and studied his pistol while a police chief who was a friend of the family watched. The chief told her the gun Lars had was too small. He told her she needed a larger one in case she ever had to use it. Crystal's father later described that conversation as one of the most chilling moments of his life. He did not know at the time that the person threatening his daughter was the man sitting next to her in the family home. Daniel was playing both roles. To Crystal's face, he was the concerned husband, standing at the window when cars drove by, checking the yard, acting the part of a man trying to protect his family from a dangerous outsider. Crystal's brother-in-law later testified at trial that Daniel had told him during that period that he was caught between vigilance and paranoia. Whenever a car would come by, Daniel would stand up and look out the window. Meanwhile, from his workplace at the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, Daniel was logging into the same network that investigators would later trace directly back to the fake email accounts being used to terrorize his wife. Broomfield police were actively investigating the stalking. They were focused on Anthony Holland in Utah. They were building a digital case methodically, waiting for communication companies to respond to their search warrants before approaching Holland as a suspect. Those warrants had been sent in. The responses had not yet come back. The morning of December 14, 2023, was a Thursday. It was 11 days before Christmas. Crystal got the children ready and drove 2 of them to school. She returned home shortly before 8 a.m. As she pulled into the garage and stepped out of the car, Daniel was already inside the garage, waiting in the dark. He attacked her from behind, striking her in the head multiple times with a blunt object. He then stabbed her through the heart. She was 43 years old. After killing her, Daniel used Crystal's phone to send text messages. He sent one to her brother and one to Broomfield detective Andrew Martinez, the same detective who had been handling the stalking case. Both messages implied that Crystal had been unfaithful, a claim prosecutors later proved was completely false. He also used her phone to disable the home's security system. He covered the garage's doorbell camera with blue tape taken from the kitchen. He then scheduled a text to arrive on his own phone at 8:56 a.m, a message appearing to come from Crystal that he received while driving to work, as if she was still alive when he left the house. At 9:27 a.m, Daniel arrived at work. He stopped at his regular coffee shop on the way, ordered his usual morning latte, complained to staff that it had been made incorrectly, and waited for a replacement. Around noon, he called Broomfield Police on the non-emergency line to request a welfare check, saying he did not think it was an emergency, but that his wife was not answering his texts or calls, which felt weird to him. Officers arrived at 12:28 p.m. and found Crystal on the garage floor. She had visible head trauma and a stab wound. She was pronounced dead at 12:43 p.m. Daniel was driven to the police station by a victim advocate, who later testified that on the ride over, he seemed focused on the children and was very clear that he wanted to be the one to tell them what had happened. At the station, detectives told him what investigators had found, that the threatening messages did not trace back to Holland in Utah. They traced back to an IP address at Daniel's workplace. When detectives told Daniel this, his demeanor shifted from distressed to hostile. He leaned back, looked at the ceiling and said, "It has to be the husband." He then began suggesting that the workplace Wi-Fi was easy to access and that someone else must have used it. 2 days later, on December 16, 2023, Daniel Krug was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, 2 counts of stalking, and criminal impersonation. Holland, Crystal's actual ex-boyfriend, had been cleared immediately. He had been in Eagle Mountain, Utah, more than 8 hours from Broomfield. He had not flown. He had not driven his own car to Colorado. He had a receipt from a local department store placing him there on the day of the murder. He was never a suspect after that. The digital evidence against Daniel was overwhelming. The fake email accounts used to harass Crystal had been created on password-protected networks at his workplace. The burner phones used to send the threatening texts had been purchased with a Visa gift card registered in his name. Location data showed those burner phones were repeatedly in the same areas as Daniel's personal phone. His Google search history the night before the murder included searches about how to cause unconsciousness through head trauma and how long unconsciousness lasts. A former girlfriend of Daniel's also testified at trial that he had stalked her in a nearly identical way years earlier, creating fake online personas to harass her after their breakup. He was never charged in connection with that. A multi-week jury trial concluded on April 17, 2025. The jury convicted Daniel Krug on all 4 counts: first-degree murder, 2 counts of stalking, and criminal impersonation. The following day, April 18, 2025, Judge Priscilla Lowe sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 9.5 years consecutive for the stalking and impersonation charges. District Attorney Brian Mason said at sentencing, "This was a brutal, calculated murder, preceded by months of manipulation, emotional abuse, and deception." He said Daniel terrorized his wife, his children, and an innocent man, all to control a woman who no longer wanted to be with him. Crystal's 3 children are now being raised by her brother and his wife in Boulder, Colorado. Their father is at Sterling Correctional Facility in Sterling, Colorado, where he will remain for the rest of his life. Crystal's cousin, Rebecca Ivanoff, has since been pushing for legislation that would require technology companies to respond to law enforcement search warrants within 48 hours in active stalking cases, a change she believes could have saved her cousin's life if it had existed before December 14, 2023. The legislation is known informally as Crystal's Law. Daniel Krug has maintained his innocence. In a written statement, he said he intends to appeal his conviction. The next case in this video involves a woman who also stayed for her children while trying to get out, but her husband had already mapped out exactly when and how he would end her life. And he did it on Christmas morning, with their baby daughter asleep beside her. Case 3. Manurva Cisneros. At around 3:30 in the morning on Christmas Day 2015, police arrived at a house on Donner Street in the south side of Fort Worth, Texas. The house was decorated for Christmas. The smell of brisket and pozole, a Mexican stew Manurva had cooked hours earlier, still filled the air. Inside the bedroom, officers found 30-year-old Manurva Cisneros shot once in the chest. Her 15-month-old daughter Allison was lying beside her in the bed, alive, her hair matted with her mother's blood. The man who had called 911 and said the gun went off by accident was already gone. He had driven away before the police arrived. Manurva's 3 children, Axel, Heidi, and Allison, had not had a chance to open any Christmas presents. The man who killed her was Arturo Sigala, her common-law husband and the father of all 3 children. He had nearly killed her once before, in broad daylight, 16 months earlier. She had been at a hospital then, 8 months pregnant, with a bloody nose, a busted lip, strangulation marks on her neck, and blood in her eyes. The police had been involved. Child Protective Services had been involved. Prosecutors had been involved. None of it had stopped what happened that Christmas morning. Manurva Cisneros was born in 1985. Her parents were Gonzalo and Maria Cisneros, and she grew up in Fort Worth with 7 siblings in a close family. She was 30 years old at the time of her death. Her obituary listed her survivors as her 3 children, her parents, and her 7 brothers and sisters. She was buried at Mount Olivet Cemetery in Fort Worth on January 5, 2016. The details of how Manurva met Arturo Sigala are not part of the public record, but the couple had been together long enough to have 3 children. Axel was 5 years old when his mother was killed. Heidi was 3. Allison was 15 months. Sigala had a prior criminal history, including a conviction in 2009 for possession of cocaine. He was in the country illegally. By the time of Manurva's death, police in Tarrant County knew both of their names well. In August 2014, Manurva was 8 months pregnant with Allison when she arrived at a Fort Worth hospital in serious condition. She had strangulation marks on her neck and blood in her eyes. Authorities said Sigala had tried to strangle her until she lost consciousness. The hospital contacted police. A detective was assigned to the case, but the detective could not reach Manurva, who was not cooperating with the investigation. The case stalled. While the criminal case sat unresolved, something else happened that sealed Manurva's fate. Child Protective Services opened a separate inquiry into her, alleging that she had failed to protect her 2 older children from witnessing the abuse. Manurva was now facing the possibility of losing Axel and Heidi, and the infant she had just delivered, if she was seen as an unfit mother. She and Sigala were required to attend couples counselling. She was required to take a class on how to manage his violent behaviour. The system designed to protect her was, through a separate arm, threatening the only thing she said she was staying for. Elena Bangs, a Tarrant County prosecutor who later reviewed the case, confirmed that family members and authorities understood that Manurva had become deeply afraid of losing her children. That fear is what kept her quiet. That fear is what kept her in the house. About 6 months after the strangulation incident, the assault case against Sigala was reassigned to a second detective. This detective reached both Manurva and Sigala. Sigala admitted to the detective that he had hit Manurva multiple times, but said he had been drunk and denied strangling her to the point of unconsciousness. An arrest warrant was obtained quickly. Sigala was taken into custody. Manurva then went to the Tarrant County District Attorney's office herself and said she was safe. She said she wanted him home. She asked for the case to be dropped. A grand jury heard the evidence. In April 2015, the grand jury did not indict him. Arturo Sigala walked free. 15 months passed between that grand jury decision and Christmas morning. Manurva spent that time raising 3 children with a man who had already tried to kill her once while she was pregnant. The day before Christmas 2015, she cooked for her family. She made brisket. She made pozole. The house was ready for Christmas morning. At some point in the early hours of December 25, 2015, Sigala called 911. He told the operator, "Something happened. My wife needs help." He said he sat down and the gun went off. He did not wait for police to arrive. By the time officers reached Donner Street, neighbours reported that Sigala had simply driven away in the couple's car. Manurva was dead. Alison was lying beside her. The medical examiner later listed the cause of death as a gunshot wound to the chest. The manner of death was homicide. Sigala, who had been in the country illegally, fled south. He crossed into Mexico. In the weeks that followed, Tarrant County Crime Stoppers added him to their Fort Worth 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list and offered a $1,000 reward for information leading to his arrest. Investigators in Tarrant County tracked him. He was eventually arrested at the US border and returned to Texas to face trial. A Tarrant County jury convicted Arturo Sigala of murder. He was sentenced to 50 years in prison. Minerva's 3 children, Axel, Heidi, and Alison, were taken in by Minerva's family after her death. The Washington Post, which investigated the case as part of a major 2018 report on domestic violence homicides, noted that the children were 7, 6, and 4 years old at the time of their reporting. Alison was barely 15 months old on the morning she was found next to her dead mother. Tarrant County prosecutor Elena Bangs, who reviewed the handling of the case after Minerva's death, said, "I reflect upon all of the missteps made across all of the agencies involved in Manurva Cisneros' cases and realise that her murder was potentially preventable. We know that we cannot help or prevent violence against people we don't know about. Minerva was not one of those people." What that statement acknowledges is the reality at the centre of Minerva's story. This was not a woman who hid. This was not a woman who stayed silent. She had been to the hospital. She had talked to police. She had been documented by Child Protective Services. She had sat across from prosecutors and told them she wanted the case dropped, not because she did not know what had happened to her, but because she was terrified the very system trying to help her would take her children away. The two forces that should have worked together to protect her, the criminal justice system and Child Protective Services, pulled her in opposite directions. The message she received, however unintentionally, was that cooperating with one put her at risk with the other. The attempted strangulation in August 2014 is significant beyond the violence itself. Law enforcement and domestic violence researchers have since made clear that strangulation by an intimate partner is one of the strongest indicators that a relationship will eventually end in murder. Women whose partners have strangled them are substantially more likely to be killed by that partner than women who have experienced other forms of physical abuse. Minerva's neck bore the marks of that when she arrived at the hospital in 2014. Investigators knew it, prosecutors knew it. The grand jury that chose not to indict Sigala knew it, or should have. Manurva Cisneros was 30 years old. She had spent the last year of her life in a house with the man who would kill her, raising 3 children under the age of 6, attending couples counselling sessions with her abuser, and sitting through a class on how to manage his violent behaviour. A class she was required to take because the system had determined she had failed to protect her children from witnessing that violence. The children she stayed for were there in the house when she was shot. Alison, who was 15 months old and had no understanding of any of it, was there in the bed beside her when the police arrived. Fort Worth prosecutors later said they believe a case like Minerva's could have ended differently if they had intervened earlier. That is almost certainly true. What is also true is that the intervention they had, the hospital, the police, the arrest, the grand jury, happened and still did not save her. The barrier that stopped it from saving her was the threat of losing her children. Manurva Cisneros stayed because leaving meant risking the 3 people she was staying for. It is a trap that the system she lived inside helped to build, and it killed her on Christmas morning while her children's presents sat unopened. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case in this video involves a woman who moved back to her home country, specifically to raise her daughter close to family, and whose husband had already decided, days before he killed them both, that he needed a way out. Case 4. Rachel Entwistle. Rachel Elizabeth Souza was born on December 14, 1978, in Weymouth, Massachusetts. She grew up in a close family. Her father, Paul, died when she was young, and her mother, Priscilla, later remarried Joseph Matarazzo, giving Rachel a blended family that she remained close to for the rest of her life. Friends who knew her described her as full of energy, with a sparkle in her eyes that made people fall in love with her immediately. She was the kind of person who stayed in touch, who showed up, who made plans and kept them. In 1999, Rachel took part in a study abroad program at the University of York in Northern England. She joined the university's rowing team and served as coxswain, the person who sits at the back of the boat, faces the rowers, and calls out the stroke. It was there, at the university boathouse on Love Lane, that she met Neil Entwistle. Neil was born on September 18, 1978, in Worksop, near Nottingham, England. His family was working class. His father was a coal miner. His mother worked in a school canteen. He was the first in his family to go to university and earned a master's degree in electronic engineering from York. He was quiet, smart, and knew how to present himself. Rachel was charmed. Her friends could see how much she liked him. After her study abroad year ended, Rachel went back to Massachusetts and finished her degree at the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester. Then she went back to England, back to Neil. She earned a teaching certificate there and took a job teaching English, drama, and theatre studies at St Augustine's Catholic High School in Redditch, Worcestershire. She and Neil married in Plymouth, England, on August 23, 2003. On April 9, 2005, their daughter Lillian Rose was born in Worksop, where Neil's parents lived. By the summer of 2005, Rachel had made a decision. She wanted to bring Lillian home to Massachusetts, home to her mother and stepfather and the family she had grown up around. Neil agreed to the move. His parents threw the couple a farewell party before they left. Rachel's family in Massachusetts was overjoyed. When Rachel made the decision to come back home, her parents later said, it was so Lillian could be raised surrounded by the family she loved. The Entwistles arrived in Massachusetts in the summer of 2005 and initially stayed with Priscilla and Joseph Matarazzo at their home in Carver. By the fall, they had found a rented 4-bedroom house at 6 Cubs Path in Hopkinton, about 26 miles west of Boston. They moved in during the first week of January 2006. Rachel was home with Lillian full-time. Neil was meant to be the breadwinner. What Rachel did not know was that Neil had not worked since September 2005. He had told her, and her family, that he was earning $10,000 a month from an offshore account set up by a previous employer in the UK. There was no such account. There was no such income. Neil had built a fiction around himself to keep Rachel from seeing what was actually happening. He was running a series of failing internet schemes, including a fraudulent software sales operation on eBay that had drawn an investigation. He had 18 credit cards, all but one of them maxed out. His total debt exceeded $30,000. The family was paying $2,700 a month in rent for the Hopkinton house, with no real money coming in. The bills were piling up, and Neil had no plan for what happened when Rachel found out. 4 days before he killed them, on January 16, 2006, someone using the laptop at the Entwistle home searched online for how to kill with a knife. The following afternoon, January 17th, searches were made on the same laptop for knife in neck kill and quick suicide method. The same computer had also been used in the days before the murders to browse websites for escort services in the Hopkinton area, including sites named Naughty Nightlife, Hot Local Escorts, and Exotic Express. Neil had also visited adult dating sites and written messages to women saying that, although he was in a relationship, he was looking for more fun. He had posted a naked photo of himself on one of these sites. Rachel, as far as anyone could tell, had no idea about any of it. She had a dinner planned with a friend for the evening of Saturday, January 21st. She had spoken with family members on the phone on the night of Thursday, January 19th. She was a new mother in a new house in the town she had grown up near, doing everything she had crossed an ocean and built a life to achieve. In the early hours of Friday, January 20th, 2006, Neil Entwistle took a .22 caliber revolver from the home of his in-laws, Joseph and Priscilla Matarazzo, in Carver. He drove back to Hopkinton. Rachel and Lillian were in the master bedroom together, in bed. Lillian was 9 months old. Neil shot Rachel once in the forehead at close range. The bullet passed through Rachel's body and struck Lillian in the torso. Lillian was shot at contact range. The barrel of the gun was pressed directly against her. He then pulled the duvet up and covered both of their bodies. He drove the 50 miles back to Carver and returned the gun to his in-laws' home without being seen. He drove back to Hopkinton. At around 5 a.m. on the morning of January 21st, he bought a one-way ticket at Logan International Airport in Boston. He boarded a British Airways flight to London at 8:15 a.m. and flew home to England. Rachel and Lillian were still in the bed in the master bedroom when he landed. On the evening of January 21st, Rachel's friend arrived at the house for their planned dinner. Nobody answered the door. She could not reach Rachel or Neil by phone. She contacted Priscilla, who also had not heard from her daughter. Priscilla called the police. Officers arrived and conducted a welfare check. They went through the house. They saw the family dog in a crate, surrounded by moving boxes. They did not notice anything in the master bedroom. The bodies were not found on that first visit. The police classified the family as missing. Priscilla filed an official missing persons report the following day, January 22nd. Police returned to the house. This time, they detected an odour coming from the master bedroom. They pulled back the duvet. Rachel was 27 years old. Lillian Rose was 9 months old. They had been there, hidden under the bedding for 2 days. On January 23rd, a Massachusetts State Police trooper named Robert Manning reached Neil Entwistle by phone at his parents' house in Worksop, England. Neil told the trooper he had found Rachel and Lillian dead on the morning of January 20th, after returning from running errands. He said he could see a gunshot wound on Lillian's body and blood around her mouth. He said he did not call the police because he did not know what number to call. He said he drove to his in-laws' house in Carver to get a gun so he could kill himself, but could not get into the house. He said he then flew to England to be with his parents. The trooper later recalled that when he told Neil the deaths were being investigated as suspicious, Neil's response was, "Okay." Investigators went to the Matarazzo home in Carver. They found the .22 caliber Colt revolver in Joseph Matarazzo's collection. Forensic testing linked the gun to the murders. Neil's fingerprints were on it. The bullet that had killed Lillian had also lodged in Rachel's body. The gunshot wound to Rachel's forehead had been so small it had initially gone undetected. Forensic chemists who examined Rachel's hands found gunshot residue on them, a finding that the defense would later try to use to suggest she had fired the weapon herself, arguing that the case was a murder-suicide in which Rachel had killed Lillian and then turned the gun on herself. On February 9, 2006, British police arrested Neil Entwistle on a London Underground train at Royal Oak Station. He was extradited to the United States and arraigned at Framingham District Court, where he was held without bail. He pleaded not guilty. The trial did not begin until June 2, 2008, in Woburn, Massachusetts. Prosecutors called more than 40 witnesses over 12 days. The defense called none. Neil Entwistle did not testify. The prosecution laid out the financial collapse Neil had hidden from Rachel: the debt, the fake income, the fraud investigations, the maxed-out credit cards. They presented the internet searches made on the Entwistle laptop in the days before the murders. They presented evidence that on the day of the killings, Neil had also logged into his account on an adult dating site. They argued he had seen no way out of the life he had built around lies, and had chosen to eliminate the people who would have been most affected when the truth came out. The defense argued that Rachel, suffering from postnatal depression, had shot Lillian and then turned the gun on herself, and that Neil had not called police out of a desire to protect her memory. During deliberations, one juror who was roughly the same height as Rachel, both women were 5 feet 2 inches tall, physically acted out the positions in which a person of that height could have held the gun to attempt a self-inflicted wound. The juror concluded it was not physically possible in the way the defense suggested. The jury deliberated for less than 12 hours. On June 25, 2008, Neil Entwistle was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, possession of a firearm, and possession of ammunition. He showed no emotion as the verdict was read. He closed his eyes and shook his head slightly. Outside the courthouse, his mother Yvonne told reporters that the evidence pointed to Rachel murdering her own granddaughter. She said she and her husband would continue fighting for their son. Judge Diane Kottmeyer sentenced Entwistle to 2 concurrent terms of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, the mandatory sentence for first-degree murder in Massachusetts. She described the murders as incomprehensible acts that violated the fundamental bonds of human identity. She also ordered that Entwistle could never profit from selling his story through books, films, or any other media. Neil Entwistle appealed his conviction to the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, arguing that searches of the Hopkinton house had been conducted without warrants and that media coverage had made a fair trial impossible. The court rejected both arguments in August 2012, concluding that he had received a fair trial that was ably tried and judged. He then petitioned the United States Supreme Court. The Supreme Court declined to hear the case in January 2013. Every avenue of appeal was exhausted. He is currently incarcerated at Old Colony Correctional Center in Bridgewater, Massachusetts, where he will remain for the rest of his life. Rachel's parents, Priscilla and Joseph Matarazzo, established the Rachel and Lillian Rose Foundation in their daughter's memory to raise awareness of domestic violence and child abuse. A room at a child advocacy center in Foxborough, Massachusetts, named Rachel and Lily's Loft, was dedicated in their honor. Rachel and Lillian were buried together in a single coffin at Evergreen Cemetery in Kingston, Massachusetts. Their grave marker carries the surname Souza. Lillian's birth and death certificates were amended to read Father Unknown. Rachel Entwistle came home to Massachusetts for Lillian. She wanted her daughter raised near family, near the people who loved them, near everything familiar and safe. She died in a house she had lived in for less than 3 weeks, in a town she barely knew, beside her 9-month-old daughter, because the man she had followed across an ocean and back had run out of room to keep lying. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case in this video involves a woman who stayed in a collapsing marriage, specifically because leaving would mean losing daily access to her children, and whose husband spent the last days of her life searching online for how to get rid of a body. Case 5. Anna Walshe. Anna Ljubicic was born in Belgrade, Serbia in 1983. She grew up there, attended the 5th Belgrade Gymnasium, and earned a degree in French language and literature from the University of Belgrade. In 2005, when she was 22 years old, she packed up and moved to the United States. She started at the bottom. Her first job in America was as a housekeeper at the inn at Little Washington in Virginia. The following year, she worked there as a server. She then moved to New York City for a period before settling in Massachusetts in 2008, where she took on the role of reservations manager at the Wheatley Hotel, a luxury property in Lenox in the Berkshires. It was at the Wheatley that she met Brian Walshe. Brian was the son of a prominent neurologist named Thomas Walshe, whose family had money and property and social standing in Boston. Brian had dropped out of Carnegie Mellon University and spent the years before meeting Anna running a series of business ventures that never quite worked. He was charming, sociable, and, according to neighbours who later spoke to reporters, considered by most people to be the less impressive half of the couple. When Anna met him, she described it as love at first sight. She would use those words years later in a letter she wrote to a federal judge asking for leniency on Brian's behalf, saying she felt the same way about him as she had on the very first day. They dated long distance for years. Anna was previously married to a man named Mark Knipp, whom she divorced in 2014. She and Brian married on December 21, 2015 at Emmanuel Episcopal Church in Boston. Not one member of Brian's family attended the wedding. The couple went on to have 3 sons. At the time of Anna's death on January 1, 2023, the boys were 2, 4, and 6 years old. Anna's career kept climbing while Brian's stalled. She moved from hospitality into real estate, built a portfolio of properties the couple bought and flipped or rented, and eventually transitioned into corporate real estate. In February 2022, she became a regional general manager at Tishman Speyer, a major commercial real estate firm working out of their Washington, D.C. office. She had called the job her dream job. To do it, she split her time between their home in Cohasset, Massachusetts, an affluent coastal town about 15 miles southeast of Boston, and a townhouse she purchased in Washington, D.C. The reason Anna was living apart from her children most of the week was not a choice she made freely. It was a direct result of Brian's legal situation. In 2021, Brian pleaded guilty to federal fraud charges connected to selling 2 counterfeit Andy Warhol paintings to a French buyer. He and Anna had used money from those sales for a shopping spree at Prada. Brian was granted home confinement while he awaited sentencing, and the terms of that confinement required him to remain in Massachusetts as the primary caregiver for the children. Anna was the family's main earner. She was also the parent most desperate to be with her boys. Her boyfriend, William Fastow, a Washington, D.C. real estate broker she had begun seeing in early 2022, later testified at Brian's murder trial that Anna was deeply despondent about the arrangement. She felt she was not in a position to be the mother her children deserved, he said. She was deeply upset about it. Initially, she had accepted it as something she had to get through, but as months passed and Brian's sentencing kept getting delayed, it became a major point of pain. The federal fraud sentencing dragged into 2022 and then into the holiday period at the end of that year. While it remained unresolved, Anna could not bring the boys to Washington, D.C. She could not live full-time with her children without uprooting their lives, so she stayed in the structure that existed. She commuted. She managed. She planned for a future she told Fastow she hoped would look different. Fastow testified that he and Anna spent Thanksgiving 2022 together in Dublin, Ireland, and Christmas Eve with his friends in Annapolis, Maryland. Anna had planned to fly home to Cohasset on Christmas morning. Her flight was cancelled. She drove up late on Christmas Day and arrived home that night. The family then spent a few days together. On New Year's Eve, December 31st, 2022, Anna and Brian hosted Jem Mutlu, a friend and Anna's former employer, for a small dinner at their home in Cohasset. Anna had written a note that evening in red ink on the side of a champagne box. It read, "Let's make 2023 the best one yet. We are the authors of our lives. Courage, love, perseverance, compassion, and joy. Love, Anna." Mutlu later told reporters that nothing seemed wrong between Anna and Brian that night. After Mutlu left in the early hours of New Year's Day 2023, Anna sent Fastow a text message wishing him a Happy New Year. It was the last message he ever received from her. What investigators later pieced together, through surveillance footage, digital records and forensic evidence, is that at some point in the early hours of January 1st, 2023, Anna Walshe was killed inside the Cohasset home. Brian then went to a Lowe's store in Rockland, Massachusetts, at 4:55 a.m. on January 1st, where he spent $462 in cash on a hacksaw, utility knife, hammer, wire snips, a Tyvek protective suit, shoe guards, rags, and cleaning supplies. He was captured on the store's surveillance cameras. Over the following days, he visited multiple other stores, Walgreens, CVS, Stop & Shop, Home Depot, buying additional cleaning products, hydrogen peroxide, and other materials, often wearing a face mask and paying cash. His digital devices showed search after search made in the hours and days after Anna's death. Best way to dispose of a body? How long for someone to be missing to inherit? Best way to dispose of body parts after a murder? Can you be charged with murder without a body? And 10 ways to dispose of a dead body if you really need to. Surveillance cameras also captured a man resembling Brian, throwing heavy bags into dumpsters near the couple's home and near an apartment complex where his mother lived in the days following Anna's disappearance. Brian told friends and family in the days after January 1st that Anna had left early that morning for a work emergency in Washington, D.C. He said she had called for a ride and gone. When Anna's employer, Tishman Speyer, could not reach her after the holiday and reported her missing on January 4th, police began looking into the account Brian had given. There was no record of Anna boarding a flight. There was no rideshare record. Her credit and debit cards had not been used since January 1st. Her phone had last pinged near the Cohasset home in the early hours of January 2nd. Brian was arrested on January 8th, 2023, initially charged with misleading a police investigation. Investigators then found a bloody knife in the basement of the Cohasset house. A search of a trash processing facility near Brian's mother's apartment uncovered garbage bags containing a hacksaw, a hammer, shears, a Tyvek suit, towels, a piece of rug soaked in blood, a Prada purse, a pair of boots matching the description of ones Anna was last seen in, and Anna's COVID-19 vaccination card with her name on it. DNA testing by the Massachusetts State Police Crime Laboratory linked Anna's DNA to the hacksaw, hatchet, and other items. A Gucci necklace clasp was found stuck in the fibres of the bloodied rug when it was recovered from a dumpster. Anna Walshe's body has never been found. Brian was indicted on first-degree murder charges in March 2023. He spent over 2 years in pre-trial custody. In September 2025, he was stabbed during a prison attack and underwent a mental competency evaluation before being deemed fit to stand trial. On November 18, 2025, just before jury selection began, Brian changed his plea on 2 lesser charges: misleading a police investigation and improper conveyance of a human body, to guilty, while maintaining he had not killed Anna. His murder trial began on December 1, 2025, in Dedham, Massachusetts. Prosecutors called approximately 50 witnesses over 8 days. The defense called none. Brian Walshe did not testify. Jurors heard William Fastow describe Anna's affair and her despair about being separated from her children. They heard Brian's recorded police interviews, in which he calmly described a happy marriage while lying about the circumstances of his wife's disappearance. They saw surveillance footage of him buying cutting tools at Lowe's in the hours after prosecutors believe he killed her. They heard about his Google searches, including one for "How long does it take a missing person to be declared dead for inheritance purposes?" They were shown digital records of Brian searching for William Fastow's name on his phone on December 25, 2022, Christmas Day, the same day he and Anna argued about her absence from the family. Prosecutors also presented evidence that Brian had searched for best divorce strategies for men and Washington, D.C. divorce lawyers in the days between Christmas and New Year's. An insurance executive testified that Anna had a life insurance policy worth more than $1 million, with Brian listed as the sole beneficiary. The jury deliberated for approximately 6 hours across 2 days. On December 15, 2025, they returned a verdict of guilty on the charge of first-degree murder. Brian Walshe stared straight ahead as it was read. He showed no emotion. On December 18, 2025, Judge Diane Frenier sentenced Brian Walshe to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She also imposed a minimum of 19 years for the witness intimidation charge and a minimum of 2 years for improper disposal of a body, to be served consecutively to the life sentence. In sentencing, she addressed Brian directly. She said, "The seriousness of your acts cannot be overstated. Your acts in dismembering your wife's body and disposing of her remains in multiple area dumpsters can only be described as barbaric and incomprehensible. You had no regard for the lifelong mental harm that your criminal acts inflicted on your then 2, 4, and 6-year-old sons." Anna's sister, Alexandra Dmitrievich, spoke at the sentencing. She said the loss had left her family with an unbearable emptiness. She said, "The most painful part of this loss is knowing her children must now grow up without their mother's hand to hold. They now face a lifetime of milestones, big and small, where her absence will be deeply and painfully felt." The 3 Walshe boys have been in Massachusetts state custody since Brian's arrest in January 2023. Anna's body has never been found. Her mother lives in Belgrade. Under Massachusetts law, Brian Walshe's first-degree murder conviction is automatically reviewed by the state's Supreme Judicial Court. Anna Walshe commuted between 2 cities for nearly a year because the alternative, upending her children's lives and moving them away from their routines while their father's case dragged through the courts, felt like the wrong thing to do for them. She stayed tied to a structure that kept her away from her boys most of the week, because that structure was the only one available to her, while Brian remained on home confinement as their primary caregiver. She planned to get to the other side of his legal situation and then build the life she actually wanted. She did not get there. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case in this video involves a woman who had already started that process of building something new. She had a career, she was taking steps, but stayed physically present in the marriage long enough for her husband to plan exactly what he was going to do to her. Case 6. Lacy Peterson. Lacy Denise Rocha was born on May 4, 1975, in Modesto, California. She grew up there, in a family that split when she was young. Her parents, Dennis and Sharon, divorced, and Sharon later entered a long-term relationship with a man named Ron Gransky, who helped raise Lacy and her brother Brent. Lacy maintained a close relationship with both her mother and her father, who ran a tractor and equipment service on a farm in nearby Escalon. She was, by every account from people who knew her, the kind of person who filled a room. A childhood friend described her as always smiling, bubbly and talkative. She was a cheerleader in junior high and high school. She liked cooking, entertaining, and watching Martha Stewart. After high school, Lacy enrolled at California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo, where she studied ornamental horticulture. She met Scott Lee Peterson sometime around 1994 or 1995. He was also a student at Cal Poly, studying agricultural business and working part-time as a waiter at a restaurant in Morro Bay called the Pacific Cafe. Lacy saw him there, liked him enough to write down her phone number, and gave it to a mutual acquaintance to pass along. Scott called. Their first date was a deep-sea fishing trip, during which Lacy got seasick. They kept seeing each other anyway. In December 1996, Scott proposed. They married on August 9, 1997, at Sycamore Mineral Springs Resort near San Luis Obispo, a small ceremony in the wooded hills of the California coast. Lacy was 22, Scott was 24. After their honeymoon in Tahiti, they opened a burger and sports bar together in San Luis Obispo called The Shack. In 2000, they sold the business and moved to Modesto, back to Lacy's hometown, to be closer to her family and start the next chapter. Scott found work as a fertilizer salesman for a company called Trade Corp USA. Lacy worked as a substitute teacher at a local school. They bought a 3-bedroom, 2-bath bungalow on Covina Avenue in an upscale neighborhood near East La Loma Park for $177,000. They fixed it up together. Lacy handled the interior design. Scott did woodworking. They tried for a while to have a baby. It took longer than expected. In May 2002, Lacy found out she was pregnant. The due date was February 10, 2003. They had already decided on a name, Connor. Lacy's mother Sharon later said there was no reason to suspect any problems in the marriage. They seemed like a happy couple. Sharon described her daughter as extremely happy with her husband and her life. On November 20, 2002, Lacy was 7 months pregnant. Scott met a Fresno massage therapist named Amber Fry through a mutual friend that same day. He told her he was not married. He told her he had never been married. 3 weeks later, on December 9, 2002, Scott called Fry and told her he had lost his wife, that she had died, and that this would be his first Christmas without her. On the same day he made that call, Scott bought a small fishing boat for $1,400 in cash from a private seller. He had not held a fishing license since 1994. He did not tell anyone in his family, including his father, an avid fisherman, that he had made the purchase. He had researched boat launch ramps in the San Francisco Bay the day before. He told witnesses in the days that followed that he planned to go golfing on Christmas Eve. Lacy spent the evening of December 23, 2002, at a salon where her sister Amy cut Scott's hair, as she did each month. Lacy had spoken with her mother Sharon on the phone around 8:30 that night, and the two talked about plans for Christmas Eve dinner the next day. That phone call was the last confirmed conversation Lacy had with anyone outside the home. Sharon later said she went to bed, not thinking anything was wrong. The following morning was Christmas Eve, December 24, 2002. Scott later told investigators he left the house around 9:30 a.m. He said Lacy was watching Martha Stewart and getting ready to mop the floor and walk the dog. He said he was going fishing at the Berkeley Marina, approximately 90 miles from their Modesto home, in the boat he had purchased 15 days earlier and never taken on water before that day. Cell phone records showed a call from Scott's phone at 10:08 a.m. that bounced off a tower near the Modesto house, suggesting he had not yet left by the time he later said he had. 10 minutes after that cell phone ping, a neighbour found the couple's golden retriever Mackenzie wandering the neighbourhood alone, wearing his leash. The dog was returned to the Petersons' backyard. When Scott arrived home that afternoon, he said he found Mackenzie in the yard with his leash still on and the house empty. Lacy's car was in the driveway. Her wallet, purse, keys, and sunglasses were inside the house. Scott called his mother-in-law Sharon to ask if Lacy was with her. That call was how Sharon learned her daughter was missing. Sharon's partner, Ron Gransky, called police. Officers arrived and began a search of the area. Scott told detectives he had been fishing for sturgeon in the San Francisco Bay. When one officer asked what kind of fish were at the location he described, Scott could not say. The search for Lacy went on for weeks. Volunteers numbering in the hundreds combed parks, fields, and waterways around Modesto. Scott gave media interviews from the front porch of the Covenant Avenue house, appealing for Lacy's safe return. He appeared calm. Lacy's cousin Harvey Kemple later testified that Scott showed more reaction to burning chicken at a family barbecue than he did to his pregnant wife's disappearance. On December 30th, 2002, 6 days after Lacy went missing, Amber Fry contacted Modesto police. She had seen Scott in the news coverage and recognized him. She told investigators he had told her he was single and that his wife had died. Based on the timeline Fry provided, Scott had described himself as a widower on December 9th, 2 weeks before Lacy disappeared. Detectives concluded Scott had been planning the murder before it happened. Fry agreed to record her ongoing phone calls with Scott. He kept calling her. On New Year's Eve 2002, while a candlelight vigil for Lacy was being held in Modesto, Scott called Fry from his car and pretended he was calling from Paris, France. On April 13, 2003, a person walking a dog along a tidal flat of San Francisco Bay at Point Isabel Regional Shoreline in Richmond found the remains of a male fetus. The following day, a jogger spotted a human torso in the rocky shoreline, approximately 1 mile away. DNA testing on April 18th confirmed both sets of remains were Lacy Peterson and her unborn son, Connor. They were found near the Berkeley Marina, the same stretch of water where Scott said he had been fishing on Christmas Eve. Prosecutors later argued that Scott had made 5 cement anchors in a warehouse where he stored the boat, and that only one was recovered, suggesting the others had been used to weigh down Lacy's body before it eventually broke free and drifted to shore. On April 18, 2003, the same day the bodies were identified, Scott Peterson was arrested near a golf course in La Jolla, California, close to the Mexican border. His hair had been dyed blonde. In the car, officers found approximately $15,000 in cash, camping equipment, multiple cell phones, and his brother's identification. He was charged with 2 counts of murder, first-degree murder for Lacy and second-degree murder for Connor. Scott pleaded not guilty. He hired celebrity defense attorney Mark Geragos. Due to the extreme level of publicity in Modesto, the trial was moved 90 miles away to Redwood City in San Mateo County. It began in June 2004 and lasted 5 months. Amber Fry testified for several days, playing the recorded phone calls in which Scott lied to her about his location and his life while his pregnant wife's body was decomposing in the bay. On November 12, 2004, the jury convicted Scott Peterson of first-degree murder for killing Lacy and second-degree murder for killing Connor. On March 16, 2005, he was sentenced to death by lethal injection at San Quentin State Prison. In August 2020, the California Supreme Court upheld the murder convictions but overturned the death sentence, finding that the trial court had improperly dismissed prospective jurors who opposed the death penalty during jury selection. On December 8, 2021, Scott Peterson was resentenced at San Francisco County Superior Court. He is currently serving life in prison without the possibility of parole at Mule Creek State Prison. He has maintained his innocence throughout. At the 2021 resentencing, Lacy's mother Sharon Rocha addressed the court and spoke directly to Scott Peterson. She said, "Lacy's dead, Scott, because she loved you and trusted you. Your evil, selfish act ended 2 beautiful souls. You just didn't want them anymore. You didn't want a baby, nor the responsibility of being a father. You were afraid of being looked on as a failure." On December 8th, she told the court, Scott had researched boat launch ramps in San Francisco Bay. On December 9th, he bought the boat you used to dump Lacy's body in the bay. You dumped her body in the bay like a piece of garbage. Lacy Peterson died at 27 years old, 8 months pregnant, in the house she had bought to start a family, in the town where she grew up, beside the family she had moved back to be close to. The due date for the son she had named Connor passed on February 10, 2003, while her remains were still at the bottom of the bay. The Unborn Victims of Violence Act, also called Lacy and Connor's Law, was passed by the United States Congress in 2004, in part as a direct result of what Scott Peterson did to his family on Christmas Eve 2002. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case in this video involves a woman who had no citizenship in the country where she was living, no easy way out, and 2 young daughters she was not prepared to leave behind, and whose husband had been watching her every move through a hidden camera he had installed in their own home. Case 7. Adriana Perez. Adriana Perez was born in Mexico and came to the United States as an adult. She settled in Houston, Texas, where she built her life, raised her children, and made her home. She was 41 years old at the time of her death. The public record does not contain information about her exact birth date, the city in Mexico where she grew up, or the precise year she arrived in the United States. What is documented, and what prosecutors laid out in detail at trial, is what her life in Houston looked like and the conditions she was living in for years before October 2, 2018. Jordi Hussein Suljanovic was a Bosnian refugee who had come to the United States and eventually settled in Houston, where he worked as a long-haul truck driver. He and Adriana had 4 children together. His adult son from a previous relationship, also named Jordi Suljanovic, lived with them or was closely connected to the household. Adriana's 2 youngest children were daughters, who were still young at the time of the murder. Prosecutors established during trial that Suljanovic had a long and documented history of physically and verbally abusing Adriana throughout their relationship. He hit her, he berated her. The abuse was not secret to those who knew them. The reason Adriana did not leave, according to the prosecutors who built the case against her husband, and who spoke about her situation publicly after his conviction, was layered. She had been born and raised in Mexico. She did not hold United States citizenship. As an immigrant without legal status of her own, leaving was not as simple as packing a bag and going somewhere safe. She had no independent legal standing in the country. She had no guarantee that she could take her daughters with her, or that she would be able to stay near them if she left. The Harris County Assistant District Attorney, Lauren Bard, who prosecuted the case, said plainly after the conviction, she had been verbally and physically abused by him, and since she was born and raised in Mexico, she did not have citizenship of her own, and probably did not feel like she could leave. She could not go anywhere. She was sure Adriana felt trapped, and that she also had 2 younger daughters, and probably stayed in part because of the kids. What Adriana did not know was that Suljanovic had installed a hidden camera inside their house. He had set it up specifically so he could monitor what happened at home while he was away on long-haul trucking routes, sometimes covering hundreds of miles across several states. He watched the camera feed from his truck while he drove. The camera was not a security device intended to protect the family. It was a surveillance tool aimed at his own wife. At some point in 2018, Adriana began seeing a man named Omar Santamaria Ruiz, who was 33 years old. On October 2, 2018, Suljanovic was away from Houston on a long-haul job when he accessed the camera feed from his truck and saw Adriana and Santamaria Ruiz together inside the house. He turned the truck around and drove back to Houston. It was the middle of the night when he arrived. He entered the house and went to the master bedroom. Adriana and Omar Santamaria Ruiz were in the closet of that bedroom. Suljanovic shot and killed both of them. The gunshots were loud enough to wake the children who were sleeping elsewhere in the house. The children were alive. Their mother was dead on the floor of a closet. After the shootings, Suljanovic did not call police or emergency services. Instead, he contacted his adult son, the younger Jordi Suljanovic, who was then 21 years old. Together, father and son loaded both bodies into a vehicle and drove out of Texas into Louisiana. They split up to dispose of the remains. Santamaria Ruiz's body was dumped in woodland outside of Natchitoches, Louisiana. The younger Suljanovic then drove to a location near the Atchafalaya River outside of Baton Rouge and dumped his own mother's body there. Adriana Perez was not reported missing. She was not given a funeral in the days after her death. Her body was in a field in Louisiana, while her children were in Texas without her. In the weeks that followed the murders, Suljanovich sold the family's house in southwest Houston. He gathered his 2 young daughters, his adult son, and his son's 16-year-old girlfriend, and the group flew to Mexico City. He was planning to get his family to Bosnia, his country of origin, and disappear entirely. A Harris County grand jury indicted him on capital murder charges in January 2019. When Suljanovich learned that a murder charge had been filed against him, he attempted to board a flight with the children from Mexico City to Bosnia. The group made the first leg of the trip. When the plane landed in London, law enforcement was waiting. He was detained at the London layover and transferred back to Houston, where he was arrested jointly by the Houston Police Department and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. His adult son, Jordy Suljanovich Jr., was charged separately. In 2022, the younger Suljanovich pleaded guilty to 1 count of tampering with evidence, specifically the tampering with a corpse, his own mother's body, in exchange for a 5-year prison sentence. A kidnapping charge against him was dismissed as part of the plea agreement. The older Suljanovich's capital murder trial began in March 2023 in Harris County, Texas. It lasted 8 days. Prosecutors presented the surveillance evidence, the timeline of the murders, the disposal of the bodies, and the documented history of domestic violence in the marriage. The jury asked for and received all exhibits that had been shown during the proceedings, a sign that they were examining the physical and forensic evidence carefully before reaching their decision. On March 14, 2023, the jury convicted Jordy Hussein Suljanovich of capital murder. Under Texas law, a capital murder conviction carries an automatic sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole when the death penalty is not sought. He was sentenced immediately upon conviction. There was no separate sentencing hearing. He will never be released. At the conclusion of the trial, victim impact statements were delivered by Adriana's brother and by the sister of Omar Santamaria Ruiz. Their statements were not made public in detail, but both spoke about what it meant to lose someone they loved to a man who chose to respond to his wife's affair with execution. Harris County District Attorney Kim Ogg addressed the outcome publicly. She said, "This man killed 2 people, including the mother of his children, and tried to flee the country to escape responsibility. We know that domestic violence can escalate to murder, and that is why it is so important to seek justice for the victims in cases like this." Adriana's 2 young daughters had been taken from Texas to Mexico City by the man who killed their mother, then nearly transported to Bosnia to live under his control permanently. After his arrest and extradition back to Houston, the children's situation was addressed separately from the criminal proceedings. They were no longer under Suljanovich's custody. Adriana Perez stayed in a marriage where she was physically beaten and verbally abused, in a country where she had no citizenship and no guaranteed legal right to remain if she left her husband, with 2 daughters she was not willing to abandon. She had no path out that felt safe or certain. She found a connection with someone outside that marriage, and her husband surveilled her in her own home, drove back across the state in the dark, and killed her for it. She never got to leave. The decision about what her life would look like was taken from her in a closet in the middle of the night, while her children slept down the hall. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case in this video involves a woman who had already made her decision, had gone as far as leaving for a month, and only came back for her children, and it was that one return that gave the man she was trying to leave his only remaining chance to stop her. Case 8. Valerie Junius. Valerie Junius was 36 years old when she was killed. She lived on Roaring Oaks Lane in Katy, Texas, a suburb west of Houston in Harris County. She had 6 children, 4 from before her relationship with Lawrence Reed, and 2 she had with him. The 4 older children were 12, 16, 17, and 20 at the time of her death. The 2 younger ones, the children she shared with Reed, were 4 and 8. Her 20-year-old daughter had a 1-year-old baby of her own, which meant that on the night Lawrence Reed opened fire on his family, there was also an infant in the house. Not much has been made public about Valerie's background before she came to Texas. What her family made very clear, both in the immediate aftermath of her death and in the years leading up to Reed's trial, is that she was a mother above everything else. Every decision she made in the final weeks of her life was shaped by those 6 children, the ones she was trying to protect by staying, the ones she was trying to protect by leaving, the ones she came back for. Lawrence Reed was 56 years old at the time of the shooting. He and Valerie had been together long enough to have 2 young children. The couple had been experiencing serious marital problems in the period leading up to her death. What those problems involved has not been spelled out in detail in public court records, but what is documented is the direction things were heading. Valerie was trying to leave. Weeks before July 29, 2021, Valerie took the children and went to Chicago. Her family told ABC 13 that she had been staying with friends and family in Chicago for approximately a month, getting distance, figuring out what came next. Her cousin Shannan Junius told the outlet directly she was going to leave him. She was tired. According to Shannan, Reed knew it was over from the moment Valerie stayed in Chicago as long as she did. He knew. She said he killed her. He didn't give her a chance. While Valerie and the children were in Chicago, Reed was alone at the house on Roaring Oaks Lane. During that time, he began sending strange text messages. His messages mentioned a gun. The family, aware of what those messages suggested, searched the house when they returned. They found a .40 caliber handgun hidden in the home. They removed it and took it away from the property without Reed knowing. They believed that by getting the gun out, they had removed the immediate danger. Valerie and the children returned to Katie on July 28, 2021, the day before she was killed. The following day, July 29, 2021, was a Thursday. That evening, the house on Roaring Oaks Lane was full. Valerie was downstairs with 4 of her older children, her 20-year-old daughter and her 1-year-old grandchild. Reed was upstairs with the couple's 2 youngest children, the 4-year-old and the 8-year-old. At some point during the evening, Reed wrote his wife a long card telling her how much he loved her. He then began texting her from upstairs, repeatedly asking her to come up and read the card while he watched. Valerie texted back that she did not want to come upstairs. She was with her daughter and grandchild and did not want to leave them. She kept saying no. Reed said goodbye to his 2 young children. He then walked downstairs. The family did not know Reed had a second gun. He pulled it from his pocket. Investigators later identified it as a different weapon from the .40 caliber the family had removed, and shot his 20-year-old stepdaughter once in the chest while she was standing there with her 1-year-old baby in the room. The bullet passed through her heart, both lungs, and her liver. She did not die, but she collapsed. The children who could ran for the front door. Valerie ran out the back. Reed followed Valerie out of the house. He found her outside near a neighbour's car, where she had taken shelter with her 16-year-old son. The teenager was holding his mother's arm when Reed shot him twice. The boy survived. Reed then shot Valerie. She died outside in the street in front of her home. A neighbour came running and knelt beside Valerie and began trying to perform CPR. Reed walked over with the gun in his hand and kicked Valerie in the head. He told the neighbour she was already dead and to stop. Another one of Valerie's teenage sons was trying to reach his mother. Reed pointed the gun at him and told him to run, or he would be shot too. A neighbour present at the scene told investigators they heard Reed say, "They all need to die." Reed went back inside the house. He barricaded himself in. When deputies from the Harris County Sheriff's Office arrived, Reed told them that if anyone came in, he would shoot them. A full tactical standoff followed. What happened inside the house during that standoff is one of the most extraordinary parts of this entire case. The 20-year-old daughter, the one Reed had shot through the heart, both lungs and liver, had managed to get up during the chaos. She had found a closet somewhere in the house and hidden herself inside it with her 1-year-old baby. She called 911. She stayed on the phone with emergency services for 49 minutes while bleeding from gunshot wounds, keeping her infant quiet, while her mother's body lay outside and the man who shot her was barricaded in the same building with a gun. Responding officers eventually located where she was and found a way to extract her and the baby from the house without being detected by Reed. She was rushed to hospital and underwent emergency surgery. Witnesses at trial later said it was a miracle she lived. Reed eventually surrendered to Harris County Sheriff's Office SWAT officers. He was arrested that night. Harris County set his bond at nearly $3 million. The charges against Reed were murder for the death of Valerie Junius and 2 counts of aggravated assault of a family member for shooting the 2 stepchildren. At trial, the prosecution was handled by Assistant District Attorney Kelly Marshall from the Domestic Violence Division and ADA Elizabeth Lieberman from the Homicide Division. Marshall told the jury he had absolutely murderous intent to kill everyone in that house and would have tried if they hadn't gotten the other gun out of there. He simply ran out of bullets. The jury convicted Lawrence Reed of murder on October 3, 2024, more than 3 years after Valerie's death. He was sentenced to life in prison. He was also sentenced to the maximum 20 years each on both aggravated assault counts, to be served concurrently with the life sentence. He was 56 years old at the time of conviction. Harris County District Attorney Kim Ogg said after sentencing, "This man went on a shooting rampage in his own home, shooting 3 people that he claimed he loved. An abuser can hurt, maim and kill anyone caught in their path." Valerie Junius is survived by her 6 children. The 2 youngest, the 4-year-old and the 8-year-old she shared with Reed, were upstairs with their father in the moments before he walked down to kill their mother. The detail her family keeps returning to, the one that was repeated by Trishonda Junius in the days after the shooting and that sat behind every moment of this case, is that Valerie had gone. She had been gone for a month. She had taken the children, put distance between herself and what she was living with, and started figuring out how to leave for good. She came back because the children who were too young to travel with her were still tied to that house, to that life, to the man she was trying to get away from. She came back for them, and the day after she walked back through the front door, she was dead. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case in this video involves a woman who also never made it out, but unlike Valerie, she had already filed for divorce, already had a court date, and was killed in the days between filing and the hearing. Case 9. Jennifer Magnano. Jennifer Gauthier was born in 1965 and grew up in Connecticut. She married Scott Magnano in November 1992. They lived in Terryville, a small town in Plymouth, Litchfield County. Scott's mother lived in a separate apartment in the downstairs portion of the same house. Jennifer was not allowed to work for most of the marriage. She was not allowed to maintain contact with family or friends. The children, Jessica, who was Jennifer's daughter from before the marriage, and David and Emily, who were Jennifer and Scott's biological children, were not permitted to socialise or take part in extracurricular activities. A neighbour named Sandra Bishop would later tell police that Scott kept Jennifer on a short leash and that the children were always sent outside and not allowed to be in the house. She said Scott was often out late at night. According to the written statement Jennifer later provided to Plymouth Police on June 26, 2007, a statement she described as covering over 6 years of abuse, Scott had threatened to kill her from as early as 1992, the year David was born, if she ever tried to leave with the children. That threat was not a single incident. It was the flaw of the marriage. What was built on top of it was a structured system of isolation, financial control, physical violence, and rules that governed every part of daily life for Jennifer and the children. Jennifer was not allowed credit cards. Her father, Robert Gauthier, later told police that Scott was a violent and controlling person who had refused to allow Jennifer any financial independence throughout their years together. Scott also sexually abused Jessica. The Connecticut Office of the Victim Advocate, which conducted a formal investigative review of Jennifer's case after her death, confirmed that Jennifer had disclosed this abuse to a Plymouth police officer on April 14, 2007, when she first approached police before leaving. The abuse of Jessica was reported to police. It was not immediately acted upon. By early 2007, Jennifer had reached a breaking point. A neighbour and friend named Tracy Gallo later told investigators that Jennifer had confided in her about the abuse, that Scott had struck her, kept her isolated, threatened to slit his own mother's throat because his mother knew about what was happening in the house, and had recently hit Jessica. Gallo believed the incident involving Jessica was what finally pushed Jennifer to act. On the night of April 14, 2007, while Scott was taking a shower, Jennifer gathered her 3 children and left the house. It was 11 p.m. This was the first time in the entire marriage that Jennifer had ever left. She and the children had no money and nowhere to go. Before they left Connecticut, Jennifer met with Plymouth police officer Sulek and reported the history of abuse, including the sexual abuse of Jessica, and told the officer she believed Scott was going to kill her and her daughter. She said he had threatened to do so multiple times. The officer did not apply for an arrest warrant. He did not contact the Department of Children and Families, which he was required to do as a mandated reporter. He did not advise Jennifer to apply for a restraining order in Connecticut. Jennifer spent roughly a week hiding with her children in a motel, trying to find a domestic violence shelter in Connecticut that would take the whole family. She could not. No shelter in the state would accept them together, because Jessica was an adult and David was male. The Connecticut Coalition Against Domestic Violence was contacted. The state's process for releasing emergency funds to cover a hotel would take approximately 2 weeks. Jennifer had no 2 weeks to wait. She made the decision to leave the state. She and her 3 children boarded a 3-day cross-country train to California with no food and no money. There was one shelter in the country that agreed to accept the whole family, and it was in Van Nuys, California. They arrived and were taken in. In California, Jennifer went to the Los Angeles Police Department, filed a detailed report of the abuse, and obtained a restraining order against Scott. Jessica also obtained a restraining order. Both women documented everything. The LAPD faxed Jennifer's reports to the Plymouth Police Department in Connecticut. Jennifer faxed her California restraining order to Plymouth Police herself. She wanted Scott charged in Connecticut. She wanted the abuse on record. She was building a case from 3,000 miles away. What she did not know was that Scott had gone to court in Connecticut while she was gone, told the court she had been served at the family home when she had not been there in months, and on June 4, 2007, was awarded full custody of David and Emily. The order was granted without Jennifer's knowledge and without her presence. The court had not verified the service of notice. On June 8th, the custody order was stayed for 4 weeks until July 6th, but the damage was already done. While this was happening, Scott had also been opening credit cards and taking out cash advances in Jennifer's name. By the time Jennifer learned about it, he had run up more than $80,000 in debt in her name during the weeks she had been in California. He had also gone to the Meriden-Wallingford Chrysalis Shelter office, a Connecticut domestic violence organization, and demanded to know where his wife and children were. Staff confirmed this happened. Nobody called the police. Nobody told Jennifer. When Jennifer learned on June 23, 2007, that Scott had obtained full custody of David and Emily, she understood what it meant. She had been told by the Connecticut courts that if she did not return to the state in person to contest the custody order, she risked being arrested. The legal framework that was supposed to protect her had been used against her. She could have pursued the custody matter from California, where she had legal standing and restraining orders and documented reports of abuse, but the Connecticut courts would not allow it. Jennifer returned to Connecticut because the alternative was losing her children permanently and potentially being arrested. She returned because she was a law-abiding person and because she had fought to protect her children for 15 years and was not willing to stop. Back in Connecticut, Jennifer fought hard. With the help of an attorney, she won. She obtained her divorce. She won custody of David and Emily. She won the right to the family home. The court battle was lengthy, but she prevailed on every front. She had no intention of spending a single night in that house. The plan, on the evening of August 23, 2007, was to go to the house, collect the family's belongings, and leave. Jennifer had already arranged for a police escort. Officers arrived at the property, searched the house, and told her it was safe to enter. They then left. Scott Magnano had been hiding in his mother's downstairs apartment inside the property. After the police left and Jennifer and the children began moving through the house, Scott emerged. He was armed. He held Jennifer at gunpoint. He then shot her multiple times at close range. Jennifer Magnano was 42 years old. She was shot on the front steps of the family home in Terryville. An autopsy later confirmed she died of close-range gunshot wounds. Defensive wounds were found across her body. Her 15-year-old son David heard the first shot and then lost consciousness. He later said he was told his father shot his mother 5 or 6 times. He only remembered one. He made the 911 call. Scott Magnano fled the scene, drove a short distance to an abandoned lot near the house, and shot himself in the head. He died there. His body was found in his car. Because Scott Magnano died at the scene, there was no criminal trial. There was no conviction. There was no court hearing at which Jennifer's 15 years of documented abuse was laid out in full and placed before a jury. What happened instead was a formal government investigation. The Connecticut Office of the Victim Advocate spent 2 years reviewing every institution that had come into contact with Jennifer Magnano between April 14, 2007 and August 23, 2007, the 4 months between her first escape and her death. The report runs to 45 pages. It examines the Plymouth Police Department, the state's attorneys, the Connecticut Coalition Against Domestic Violence, the Domestic Violence Shelter System, the family courts, and the state's gun sale regulations. It documents the failures of each, one by one, in precise detail. Connecticut victim advocate Michelle Cruz described the findings as a colossal systematic failure of the systems that were supposed to protect Jennifer and her family. The report concludes that Jennifer and her children encountered unnecessary and avoidable obstacles at nearly every turn, and that the combination of those failures across multiple agencies and institutions left a woman who had done everything she was told to do with no path to safety. The report also noted clearly that the actions of Scott Magnano alone caused her death. The failures of the system did not absolve him, but those failures determined where she was standing when he pulled the trigger. Following the release of the OVA report, the Connecticut legislature passed an initial version of Jennifer's Law, which allowed domestic violence victims who had fled the state to participate in Connecticut family court proceedings by closed-circuit television, without having to return in person and place themselves within reach of their abusers. The law that Jennifer's own children had testified in support of, standing before lawmakers in the spring of 2008, was designed to prevent exactly what had killed their mother. A legal system that forced a woman back into a dangerous man's orbit because the rules required her physical presence. In 2021, Connecticut passed an expanded version of Jennifer's Law, named jointly in honor of Jennifer Magnano and Jennifer Dulos, another Connecticut mother killed by her estranged husband. The 2021 law extended the legal definition of domestic violence in the state to include coercive control, the pattern of isolation, financial domination, threats, and psychological subjugation that had defined Jennifer Magnano's entire marriage, and that the law had, for decades, failed to recognize as abuse. David and Emily Magnano, the 2 children who were on those front steps the night their mother was killed, grew up and came back. They testified in Hartford. They pushed for the law. They made sure their mother's name was attached to something that would outlast her death. Jennifer Magnano stayed in a marriage that was destroying her because leaving meant losing her children, and the first time she tried, the system confirmed that fear was justified. She left once, crossed the entire country, did everything correctly, won every legal battle, and was still killed. Not because she did anything wrong, but because the structures around her could not hold her abuser accountable while she was alive. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The final case in this video involves a woman whose husband was not a stranger to law enforcement, whose abuse was documented across nearly 2 decades, and who was killed despite a protective order that was supposed to keep her safe. Case 10. Shannan Watts. Shannan Catherine Razuchek was born on January 10, 1984, in Passaic, New Jersey, but grew up in Aberdeen, North Carolina, where her family settled and where she attended Pinecrest High School in Southern Pines. Her brother Frankie later described her as someone who never stopped. No matter if her lupus was acting up or if she was pregnant, nothing stopped her from doing what needed to be done. She had been diagnosed with lupus, an autoimmune disease that attacks the body's own tissues and can cause severe complications during pregnancy. She had also been diagnosed with fibromyalgia. Despite both conditions, she went on to have 3 pregnancies, each one described by her family as a battle she fought and won purely on determination. She met Christopher Watts through Facebook around 2010. Chris was from Spring Lake, North Carolina, and had attended Pine Forest High School in Fayetteville. He was quiet, punctual, and well liked by teachers. One former teacher, when asked about him after the murders, said Chris was one of the best students he had ever taught, always on time, did everything right. He added that he had always wondered why Chris was so quiet, and now found himself wondering what was inside his head back then that he had kept from everybody. Shannan and Chris married on November 3, 2012, in Charlotte, North Carolina. Chris's parents did not attend the wedding. His mother later told a reporter that she had not attended because she and Shannan did not get along, and she did not like how Shannan treated her son. After the wedding, the couple took a trip out west, fell in love with Colorado, and moved to Frederick, a small town of roughly 8,700 people, about 27 miles north of Denver. In 2013, they purchased a 5-bedroom home at 2,825 Saratoga Trail. It was more house than they could comfortably afford, and the financial pressure that came with it never fully went away. Their first daughter, Bella Marie Watts, was born on December 17, 2013. Their second daughter, Celeste Catherine Watts, called Cece, was born on July 17, 2015. Both pregnancies were high risk because of Shannan's lupus. The family's obituary noted that with each baby, Shannan had fought through her health struggles to bring her daughters into the world. In June 2015, the same year Celeste was born, the Watts family filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Their listed liabilities totaled over $400,000. They had a combined income of approximately $90,000 in 2014. Chris had recently started work as an operator at Anadarko Petroleum, earning $61,500 a year, and Shannan was working at a children's hospital call center for $18 an hour. But their monthly expenses of nearly $4,900, dominated by a $3,000 mortgage payment and $600 in car payments, left no room. Credit card debt, student loans, and medical bills made up the rest. Their homeowners association sued them separately for unpaid fees. After the bankruptcy, Shannan rebuilt. She joined Livell, a company that sold a nutritional supplement and wellness patch called Thrive, and turned it into a genuine income stream. She became a brand promoter and eventually reached what the company called its $80,000 club. She documented everything on Facebook and Instagram: her girls, her marriage, her products, her life. To anyone who followed her, the Watts household looked like a picture of energetic suburban contentment. Chris appeared in the videos, smiling and present. Shannan posted about how lucky she was. In April 2018, she wrote on Instagram, "Happy Husband Appreciation Day. You spoil us with love and attention. You put up with 3 impatient, demanding women in the house. You work so hard every day to provide for us. I love you so much." In early 2018, Shannan found out she was pregnant again. The baby was a boy. They had already chosen a name, Nico Lee Watts. Shannan had planned a gender reveal party for August 19, 2018. At the time she announced the pregnancy, she was describing her marriage as happy and her life as full. But Chris had already started pulling away. In June 2018, while still married to Shannan, Chris began a relationship with a co-worker named Nicole Kessinger, who worked in the environmental department of a petroleum contractor. She later told the FBI that when they met, Chris was not wearing a wedding ring and did not mention his children for some time. She did not know he was married. Their relationship became physical almost immediately and intensified quickly. In late June and into July 2018, while Shannan took the girls to North Carolina for a 6-week visit with family, Chris stayed in Colorado and spent nearly every night at Kessinger's home. On July 4th, Kessinger came to the Watts house for the first time. On July 14th, they went to a car museum together. On July 28th, they spent the night at Great Sand Dunes National Park. On August 4th, Kessinger's phone showed she spent 2 hours browsing wedding dresses online. When Chris joined his family in North Carolina for the final week of their visit, the change in him was visible to everyone around him. Shannan told friends he would not touch her or kiss her. He would not talk to her unless she pushed the conversation. On August 8th, 5 days after the family returned to Colorado, Shannan texted a friend, "I don't know how you fell out of love with me in 5.5 weeks, or if this has been going on for a long time, but you don't plan another baby if you're not in love." She sent another message saying, "He has changed. I don't know who he is." She cancelled the gender reveal party. She told at least one friend she suspected there might be someone else, but added that she did not think Chris had the nerve to pull it off. What she did not know was that Kessinger had already begun looking up how to change her name. On August 10th, Shannan flew to Scottsdale, Arizona for a Lavelle business trip. She left Bella and Celeste at home with Chris. On the night of August 11th, while Shannan was away, Chris hired a babysitter and told her he was going to a baseball game with co-workers. He went to a bar with Kessinger instead. On the night of August 12th, the night before the murders, Chris and Kessinger spoke by phone for 111 minutes. The call ended at 11:19 p.m., around the time Shannan's flight had originally been scheduled to land in Denver, though it had been delayed. At 1:48 a.m. on Monday, August 13th, 2018, Shannan's friend and colleague, Nicole Utoft Atkinson, drove her home from the airport. Shannan walked into the house, 15 weeks pregnant, exhausted after a flight delay, coming back to a marriage she was trying to understand and 2 daughters she had not seen in 3 days. Chris later admitted that at some point that morning, before he left for work, he confronted Shannan about the state of their marriage. He told her about his affair and said the marriage was not going to work. Shannan told him he would not see the children again. According to Chris's subsequent confession, he strangled her to death in their bed. 4-year-old Bella came into the room and asked what was wrong with Mum. Chris wrapped Shannan's body in a bedsheet and loaded it into the back of his truck. He put Bella and 3-year-old Celeste in the back seat. He drove to a remote oil field worksite called Survey 319, approximately 40 miles from the house, owned by his employer Anadarko Petroleum. He smothered Celeste with her own blanket in the back seat of the truck. He then pushed her body through an 8-inch hatch at the top of an oil storage tank. He did the same to Bella, putting her body into a separate tank. Before he put Bella in, she asked him in her soft voice, "Is the same thing going to happen to me as Cece?" He then dug a shallow grave in the ground nearby and buried Shannan. He drove home and went to work as normal. A neighbour's security camera captured him backing his truck into the garage in the early morning hours. The footage later understood to show him loading the bodies. Atkinson, who had dropped Shannan home just hours earlier, began trying to reach her by phone that morning. Shannan had a prenatal appointment she was not responding about. When Atkinson could not get through, she drove to the house around 12:10 p.m. No one answered the door. Shannan's car was in the garage. Atkinson called the police. When officers arrived for a welfare check at around 1:40 p.m, Chris, who had been called home from work, allowed them to search the house. Shannan's purse was found. Her lupus medication was inside it. Friends told investigators she never went anywhere without it. Her phone was found between the couch cushions. Her wedding ring was on the bedside table. Chris gave 2 television interviews that afternoon on the driveway of his home, pleading for Shannan's return. He told reporters he had left for work at 5:15 that morning, and when he left, Shannan was still home. He told a journalist they had had an emotional conversation. That was all he would say. Investigators watching him noticed he showed no outward grief. He was administered a polygraph test on August 15th. He failed it. That same day, following a police interview in which officers confronted him with the evidence, Chris told detectives that Shannan had strangled the girls and he had then killed Shannan in a rage. Investigators did not believe him. He was arrested on August 15, 2018. On the day of his arrest, Anadarko Petroleum fired him. The bodies of Bella and Celeste were recovered from the oil tanks at the Survey 319 site on August 16, 2018. Shannan's remains were found in the shallow grave nearby. The opening of each oil tank measured 8 inches in diameter. Bella had scratches on her left side from being pushed through the hatch. A tuft of blonde hair was found on the edge of one of the hatches. Chris Watts was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of unlawful termination of a pregnancy, and 3 counts of tampering with a deceased human body. On November 6, 2018, as part of a plea agreement in which the death penalty, abolished in Colorado in 2020, was removed from sentencing, he pleaded guilty to all charges. On November 19, 2018, Judge Marcelo Kopkow sentenced him to 5 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. The judge called the murders perhaps the most inhumane and vicious crime he had seen in thousands of cases. He is currently incarcerated in a maximum security facility in Wisconsin. In a prison interview in February 2019, Chris admitted to investigators that when Bella asked him whether the same thing was going to happen to her as to Celeste, he went ahead and killed her. He said he was not a monster. He said he has photos of Shannan, Bella and Celeste in his cell and reads to them every night. Shannan Watts stayed in that house and in that marriage, through financial collapse, through chronic illness, through 3 high-risk pregnancies, because her children were there, and she was the one holding everything together. She came home from a work trip in the early hours of a Monday morning, 15 weeks pregnant, and walked through her own front door for the last time. If you enjoyed this breakdown, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.